the final big story that we're going to talk about is actually one you broke about a potentially forthcoming rule from the Commerce Department over guns. If you want to tell us what your reporting found.
Yeah, this is kind of our big story of the week, an exclusive for us, where we published a leaked draft of a proposed rule from the Commerce Department, which kind of sounds dry, I'm sure, but has pretty big implications for the gun industry, as well as for foreign gun buyers in countries including Israel and Ukraine, who have obviously seen a huge uptick in civilian demand for firearms since they were both invaded, right? Since the October 7th terrorist attacks in Israel, and then obviously the Russian invasion of Ukraine. You've seen both those countries, excuse me, loosen their gun laws, and also you've seen civilians go out and buy a lot more guns than normal in those places. And I'm sure a good number of those are American-made guns. And this rule that we published, the draft, would impose a number of serious restrictions on the export of American firearms if it were to become official, right? Like, it would still, this is a draft, so they haven't finalized this rule yet. And the Commerce Department emphasized that when I spoke to them, as well as put an emphasis on the idea that maybe Israel and Ukraine would be exempted from this final rule. Some countries, there's 40 countries that are exempted from these new rules under this proposal. And in addition to those 40 countries, Israel and Ukraine are exempted from what the administration has already done right now, which is to put a pause on all firearms exports to countries outside of that bloc for 90 days. And that's set to expire next month. And it seems like this proposal is going to be what they put in place of that kind of temporary total ban on exports or export licenses. And so the big new restriction in there is it's actually kind of a pseudo gun registry that would be regulated by the Department of Congress, the U.S. Department of Congress, and administered effectively by American gun companies on foreign gun buyers, because what's required under this proposal is that anyone who wants to export an American-made firearm to another country affected by these rules has to first get a purchase order for each gun, an individual, purchase order, and then accompanying that has to be the end user, the buyers, the actual person who's going to buy the gun at the end, not the distributor or wholesaler or anything like that in a foreign country, but the actual end buyer. They have to get their passport or national ID. So they'd be collecting all of this identification documentation on foreign nationals and keeping it in American gun companies or by the American government. And that's kind of a fascinating idea, for sure. It's sort of a foreign gun registry that's run by Americans. When, of course, in the United States, we don't have a national gun registry. The federal government does not run a registry of people who buy guns here. But that seems to be what they want to do for people who buy guns in other countries.
Right.
And, so some of these, now a lot of the, NATO countries are exempt from this. There's something called the Wassenaar Agreement that is a arms trade deal that includes there's 40, as I mentioned earlier, there's 40 countries in there. And actually Ukraine is in that agreement too, but for whatever reason, they're not considered the same as the other countries for these regulations. And so they would be subject to the regulations under this proposal. So Israel's not in the Wassenaar Agreement. So they'd be subject. There's also countries like Brazil, which has also seen some efforts to liberalize its gun laws. I believe Argentina would be another one that's currently undergoing the same process of liberalization. And, the Commerce Department, as I said, they they say this is not finalized, that they're still talking with their Israeli and Ukrainian counterparts, but it would have a pretty significant impact from the experts that I spoke with, and as well as from what the industry told me. And they view it as a sort of assault weapons export ban, because it mainly applies to semi-automatic centerfire guns that have one or more banned features, which include things like pistol grips or telescoping stocks, things of that. So it's something you'd find in a traditional American assault weapons ban. So I don't know, pretty fascinating. We're the first with the rule. We published it, so you guys can go over to the Reload and check that out if you want to see the details of it. But I think it'll have a very significant impact both on the American gun industry and American foreign policy. I mean, it's kind of an effort by the American government to impose gun control restrictions on other countries through the use of American exports.
Yeah. And it's sort of, as you wrote in a members piece that members can check out, it's sort of a continuation of a theme that we've seen from the Biden administration, using the administration's limited unilateral powers to sort of go right up to that edge of where they can to do gun control, both domestically and in this case, internationally, which I think is fascinating. Yeah.
Well, up to this point, they seem to have gone over that edge according to federal courts. Right. Most of their previous efforts have been ruled unconstitutional by federal judges. Now, some of them are still in effect because they're still going through the appeals process. Like the ghost gun ban, for instance, was the Supreme Court, in fact, stepped in to put a stay on that. I don't know that, as I talk about in the piece, doesn't necessarily mean that the Supreme Court is going to side with the Biden administration on that. But yes, this is part of that continuing trend of the president trying to use unilateral power, executive power, to implement gun restrictions that he can't get through Congress, right? And he's doing this in the lead up to his reelection campaign, where he's not doing well at this point, and he also has not had good ratings on gun policy. And of course, as I believe I think you wrote about this back, it's linked in my current member piece, but these sorts of efforts also don't necessarily seem like the kind of thing that are going to improve his numbers on this issue, because they're the kind of stuff that's not really what gun control advocates want. They want bigger things that require legislation, like, a nationwide assault weapons ban. Right. But they're also, it's not hard to know if they'll even notice something like the pistol brace ban, which is a pretty expansive policy, to be fair. Like, that's millions of people affected, but it's not something the average voter has probably ever heard of. But at the same time, the people who are going to hear about it are going to be the people affected by it who don't like it. Right.
Right.
And so it's not a great recipe for boosting your polling numbers on that issue. But it seems like, he's trying. He's certainly doing his best to try and meet the goals of the gun control advocates that support him. At the very least, I think he's probably making the groups happier who had been actually at certain points earlier in his presidency attacking him. So, we'll see how that plays out in the coming months, obviously. But